Hello, everyone, and welcome to Talk Nerdy. Today is Monday, March 28th, 2022, and I'm the host of the show, Cara Santa Maria. And get this! It's episode 400. It snuck up on me. I actually didn't even notice until I got a really heartwarming email from one of you. I'm actually going to pull it up right now so that I can see it. It's so nice for all of the support. Kind of after all these years, we're still going strong. Yes. Here's the email from Jose Daniel Gomez de Segura. Thank you so much for the really, really warm note. One thing that was mentioned here is that back in the day, I used to talk a little bit about what was going on in my life. And I guess I don't do that as much now because my life has been pretty hectic. And very often I'm just trying to get the episodes out as quickly as possible. But I do have some news, so maybe it's time to share it on the show. So I am now a fifth-year PhD student in my program at Fielding Graduate University, and I have finished with all of my requirements. I'm what's called a doctoral candidate, so I've passed all of my quals, and I'm basically all but dissertation. But of course, in clinical psychology, you also do a pre-doctoral internship year. So I'm ABDI, all but dissertation and internship, and it's a pretty tough competition. It's hard to place those internships. They actually use the match program. You may have heard about that if you have any friends who went to medical school and then matched for residency or fellowship. Or internship, residency, or fellowship. And so, I just got my match results earlier this week. So I'm very excited to say that I will be interning for a year. I am moving to Nova Southeastern University in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and I'll be working at the counseling center for older adults there, doing some geropsychology clinical practice. I'm so excited. It's going to be a big life transition. But it's also, I'm really looking forward to it. So that's going to come later this year. And it's sort of that last thing as I finish up my dissertation before I graduate. So mark your calendars, because if everything goes correctly on August 31st, 2023, you can finally call me doctor. All right. I want to talk about this week's show. It's so exciting. But before I do want to thank those of you who continue to support Talk Nerdy. And what better day to do it than on the 400th episode? I seriously can't believe that. So first, let's give a shout out to the top patrons. They include Daniel Lang, David J.E. Smith, Mary Neva, Brian Holden, Christopher Pitts, Dudas Infinitas, Gabriel F. Jaramillo Gonzalez, June Sapara, Leonard Prince, and Ulrika Hagman. And if you want to hear your name at the top of the show or learn all about the other perks that are involved in supporting the show via Patreon, such as having an ad-free version of the show to download, all you've got to do is visit patreon.com/talknerdy. Of course, Talk Nerdy is and will always be 100% free to download. You would always be able to access it. But if you want to support the show to help offset that cost for others, right, that free cost, basically, Patreon is definitely the way to do it. All right. What better way to celebrate episode 400 than with an astronaut? So exciting. This week we have Nicole Stott on the show. And Nicole is, of course, an astronaut, but also an aquanaut, an artist, a mom, and now the author of her very first book, Back to Earth: What Life in Space Taught Me About Our Home Planet and Our Mission to Protect It. She's actually a veteran NASA astronaut with 2 space flights under her belt and 104 days as a crew member, both on the International Space Station and the Space Shuttle. While she was in space, she was the 10th woman to perform a spacewalk. She also flew the robotic arm to capture the first free-flying HTV, and she painted a watercolor in space. She's an artist, and she painted in space, and now that's on display. You can go see it at the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum. She also served as a NASA aquanaut. So when she was preparing for spaceflight, she was a crew member on an 18-day saturation dive mission at the Aquarius Undersea Laboratory. And now she's doing something really incredible. She's the co-founder of the Space for Art Foundation, which unites a planetary community of children through the awe and wonder of space exploration and the healing power of art, very often working with kiddos with childhood cancer. It's a fascinating chat, an important one, a profound one, and it's a real honor to have her here with us today. So without any further ado, here she is, Nicole Stott. Well, Nicole, thank you so much for joining me today.
My pleasure, Cara, to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
I'm so excited to talk to an astronaut. Especially, I think, to be honest, I've spoken with Terry Virts before. I've spoken with a couple of astronauts before on the show. I don't think I've ever spoken to a woman astronaut.
There you
What's
go. There
what's
you
that
go.
about?
It's awesome.
It's so awesome. Do you know if you had to I mean, I don't know if you're still up to date on these numbers, but when you were like in the ISS, for example, do you know what percentage of astronauts over, NASA's history have been women?
Oh,
It must be
percentage over
low.
history. Yeah, it's pretty low. I mean, I think it's still over history relatively low, but with respect to the numbers now and how, and I would say this for NASA overall, we need to figure out what the secret sauce is to how they've done this. Maybe it was deliberately at first, like pushing with, these shall be our numbers, but whatever they've done has worked. And in the astronaut office right now, there's roughly, 40 active astronauts. And I think we're close to the 40%, at least 30% mark for women. And isn't that huge? I mean, when I look, and I know it's different at some universities, but I would say on average that, this demographic for women in engineering at most colleges, I mean, they're struggling to have 20% enrollment of
Oh, for
women.
sure. I had
Yeah.
a computer scientist on the show last week, and she's like, "Oh, I'm like, there's nobody else in my department." It's just like it's computer science and engineering, and then some specific types of physics. They seem to be bringing up the rear, for sure, when it comes to gender parity. And of course, when we think of astronauts, there seem to be. Tell me if I'm wrong here. There seem to be two kind of camps that feed in to the pool of astronauts. There's sort of the military or pilot kind of trained astronauts who come from that camp, and then there's the more like engineering and like aeronautical engineering, kind of like rocket scientists.
Yeah, and I would add that, when I think about the engineering, even the military pilots, because they have to have had some other degree. They have to
Mhm.
have like one of the qualifying degrees along with their pilot training as well. Is I always use the picture of my astronaut class, and we're old people now, although some of them are still there flying, class of 2000.
Mhm.
And when I think about that, it's like so freaky weird that that could be 22 years ago.
Wow.
But I use a picture of our class. I mean, when we would do our class pictures, you always do the formal sit there in your blue suit, straight and proper and everything. And then every class does kind of a goofy picture.
Mhm.
And our class name is the Bugs because we were selected in the year 2000, which there was this whole, idea of when we rolled from 1999 to 2000 that all the computers were going to crash because they wouldn't know what to do with all those zeros.
Oh,
And
yeah,
so
Y2K,
remember
baby.
Y2K, Millennium Bug, that's what they were calling it. So, and the class before you names you. And they always try to be a little bit disparaging with their name. And
Uh-huh.
so they thought that was so funny. Those penguins thought that Bugs was so funny. And but we loved it. I mean, we love the name because most bugs have wings, which means they fly. And what does every astronaut want to do? Fly. I'm sorry, penguins, you don't.
You may be a
And like,
bird, but you
yeah,
don't fly.
I know, and you're an awesome bird. I just saw some in Antarctica, but it's like, the names before had been things like maggots and, flying escargot and things like that. And so we loved the name the bugs. But there's such a variety of bugs too, just the numbers of bugs is mind boggling. But then I love it because that picture, we've got these goofy antenna on and these like sunglasses, and we're all in kind of these weird positions and stuff. It's just funny. And I especially like it because we didn't really know each other then. That was, we were the 18th group of NASA astronauts. There were 17 of us. It was probably 2 weeks into our training. And so we were just being goofy. And I look at that picture now, I see the personality of every person in that group that I absolutely consider to be family. But also I look at it and I'm like, you know what? There really is no checklist, right? And I'm sure you deal with this too. You talk to young people or somebody wanting to come along and in what you've done, they want to know how to do that, and they're looking for the checklist. Like if I
Right,
do
right,
these
like the
three things,
flow chart of
yep,
exactly what to do, and it's like,
absolutely. Yep.
Go through a door if it gets opened, try it out,
Yep.
see what life
Yep.
offers you.
It's so amazing. And I think it's such a great picture to use because it's kind of goofy, but it really, you see the personality of all these people. And then I think you can imagine that every single one of us got there in a different way. I mean, we all ultimately had the same goal. We all understood what NASA's basic requirements were for education and, work experience and medical stuff, but not one person got there the same way. And I think that's so neat that, and as more and more people are having the opportunity to fly, as we get more women into the office and more of whatever flavor human you are into the astronaut office, and then as these public-private partnerships are growing, as the commercial, on its own is growing, there's going to be, I mean, the opportunities are going to just grow. And even within NASA itself, who's doing everything they can to make that happen. But it's kind of funny, you have a limited number of slots to fill, right? However many thousands of people now apply because you can do it electronically. And there's got to be a way. I mean, and that's where the educational requirements, the career requirements come in because you've got to be able to narrow it down somehow. But what's cool is that as more vehicles come on, as we're flying in more places, those kind of criteria are going to continue to open up even more, which is, I just love thinking about that.
Absolutely. I mean, that kind of old concept of the right stuff really doesn't apply, does it? I think that it's a little bit antiquated in the sense that when we think of a classic, I don't know, like Apollo era astronaut, we think almost of somebody who like never feels and is like so brave in the face of all sorts of trials and tribulations. But we don't think of like modern kind of space travel and the need to be cooperative, the need to get along with people in a very tight space.
That's the big deal, and I think, but what's fun, I think back to, again, with all of the Apollo guys that I still, that are alive, that I know and have had the opportunity to meet and get to know. Man, there's so many dimensions to these people as well. It's really, really cool to discover that, when you discover that Al Worden was a poet and, Alan Bean retired from NASA and became a full-time artist. And, Rusty Schweikert, I just discovered this. Rusty Schweikert purposely took like 20 different poems from different poets up with him to space because he felt like that was his way of bringing humanity along with him. And it just continues. And I think, once you get to that interview table, right? And I've had the opportunity now to sit on the other side of it and do interviews with people coming through to and applying. It's like, what their resume is, right? That has satisfied the requirements. Now you want to get to know the person. Like you said, do I want to be locked up in a relatively confined space with this person for 6 months or more? Are
Right.
they going to put the torque wrench back to zero? Are they going to have, I mean, silly stuff like that, but also, are they going to have my back when it's hitting the fan? Am I going to enjoy myself there with them? It's this mix of personality and professionalism that has to go along with it too. And I think it's just, we've gotten to the point where we understand what the best kind of teams are, and that's what a crew is. You're a team, and you've got to know that you're going to enjoy your time in space with these people, working on the things that you're all curious about and that you're wanting to help improve life on Earth. But at the same time, you need to know that really, because nothing's ever going to go as planned all the time, you need to know they'll have your back. And, those same things apply to us down here on Earth. I mean, I want to know the people I'm working with are going to have my back as well
It's
and have
true.
a
It's
good time.
almost like it's up there, so far away, so in some ways isolated, but this sampling of humanity, right? Because the ISS is an international cooperative experiment, really. It really is kind of like a microcosm of down here, but almost, ratcheted up a bit. A little bit of a pressure cooker, I can imagine.
Yeah. It is. I think you're much more aware of the fact that thin, on the other side of that thin metal hull, is the deadly vacuum of space. I mean, it's just there. And yet here, we're on a planet that's a lot like a spaceship. The analog to that thin metal hull is that thin blue line of atmosphere. And so all those things that we're doing, every day on our mechanical life support system in space, right? This ISS, as a crew of 7, every day we wake up and we're like, okay, who's responsible for knowing how much CO2 is in the atmosphere today? Who's responsible for knowing how much clean drinking water we have and the integrity of our thin metal hull and the health and well-being of all seven of us? That it's just built in to how you live and work there, because you're not going to do any science or spacewalks or fly in the robotic arm or any of the work that's going on up there without knowing that you can survive first.
Yeah, and the thing is, like, I think we're so privileged here on Earth to forget because the system is so large, but it is still a closed system. Yet because it's so big, sometimes we forget that these experiences, these interactions, this extraction that we do, the way that we live is ultimately affecting this fragile system. Like, I'm literally sitting here, I didn't even realize this, but I'm wearing my t-shirt that says there is no planet B.
Yeah.
And of course, I feel like as an astronaut, you know better because you have experienced this firsthand. But for whatever reason, very often, I think people on Earth who haven't maybe done the homework or have a more kind of naive grasp of the situation think, oh, well, if we destroy this planet, we'll just go inhabit another one. Like, no, no, it is not that easy. Like, this planet is tailor made for us. And we
Yeah.
still are having a hard time. Anywhere else we go in the entire universe, if we can even get there and survive, is going to try to kill us constantly.
Yeah, it's like I think about, even the moon, but I mean the Mars I think is more like in people's face. It's
Hmm.
more often. And it's like, okay, so when we go to Mars, it's not like opening its park-like arms to us, right? It's not saying, "Ooh, come frolic in the grass and the nature and
Yeah.
breathe this beautiful, this clean air." You're so right. We are going to have to treat Mars like a spaceship. And we're going to have to, and just like we do now, with the space station, we've done everything we can to, in a mechanical way, mimic what Earth does for us naturally. And that's what we're going to have to put in place on Mars or on the moon or, as we're venturing out even further. I mean, I look forward to the Star Trek future, but holy moly, we are absolutely going to have to be thinking about it all the time. Like, how do I put in place, where's the life support system?
Yeah.
You know?
Like this is an amazing opportunity for exploration. It shouldn't be the only option we have because we destroyed home base. Because, like you said, home base is naturally giving us these things. Like,
Yeah.
we don't have to try to breathe the air here. We don't have
Yeah.
to do any engineering for that. Although, I mean, we're starting to realize we might need to do some pretty big scale engineering for that.
Yeah.
But
And
for
it
most of
is.
our history, we haven't had to.
Yeah, and I don't think we went off on this malicious pathway of saying, okay, we're going to burn fossil fuels and we know this is
Right.
going to devastate our environment. And so, but we're still going to do it. I don't, there might be a little bit of that now, but I
Yeah,
think,
now, but yeah, not at the beginning of the Industrial
initially,
Revolution.
no,
Yeah, we have
no,
no
it's like
idea.
we were discovering solutions. We were figuring out ways to keep people alive. But then the lessons learned along with it have to be taken into account too. And I mean that's happening in space as well as we discover how to keep ourselves alive there for longer, to where our bodies aren't falling apart completely as we're in this microgravity environment. All of these things are, and what I love about them is they're twofold, right? It's helping us live in that space environment, but we're in a space environment as well. So everything we do there we can bring back and help improve life on Earth. And I believe that's going to be true even as we're figuring out how to get to Mars, survive there, as we're, talking about how do you terraform a planet that does not have naturally the ability for us to create the life sustaining stuff around us. Those kinds of lessons we're going to learn doing that on Mars, we can bring them back, I think. I think we will bring them back to Earth and say, okay, we can revitalize this system that we've been using now for farming or whatever it might be and tweak it a little bit and have it just become even more better.
Yeah, yeah,
You know what I mean?
yeah, for sure. And so much of it really is about will. I feel like a lot of the technology, a lot of the know-how and the ingenuity is there. Some things need to be harnessed a little more and refined, but a lot of that exists already. And so much of it is sort of this desire, this will, this interest, which of course, as an astronaut and aquanaut, you need, right? You have spent a long time, both undersea and up in space. And I'm looking at what 104 days in space or as a crew member. So between the ISS and the shuttle, like you have been there, but you've never been there alone. You've always been there with crew and with people with whom you have to cooperate, get along,
And
make
people
it
that aren't
work.
from, I mean, they're from all, I mean, it's just the best example of international cooperation you can find, right? And I think in these, in these recent times, at least I have been reflecting a lot on that partnership in space and how, since the earliest days of spaceflight, of human spaceflight, those kinds of partnerships, that kind of cooperation between countries that you wouldn't necessarily think would get along so well, and a lot of times, like now, aren't here on the planet, overcome that somehow, like rise above it, even off the planet, and figure out a way to do that. And I think I'm really so hopeful that will come into play with what's going on now in a way that tempers, like it always has, our reaction to each other down here on Earth. And oh my God, 16, 15, 16 countries. It's like one crew on the space station. I get asked a lot, well, do you only get to stay in the modules that the US built? Do you ever get to go down to that Russian module? I'm like, it's one space station with one crew representing those 15 countries and 5 international agencies. It's not Nikki only gets to go into the US laboratory and Koichi can only be in the gem and Oleg is down in the service module. It's not that. It's absolutely the opposite. And you really, really feel it when you're working throughout the day, but in the evening when you're floating around the dinner table together and solving the world's problems from your, pretty extraordinary vantage point, wishing that all those leaders, right now, I just really, really wish that we could get those people up into space with their little heads bouncing off each other in front of one of those windows while they're floating looking at Earth.
Right, and just get that instant perspective shift that they are so desperately needing. Because I can't imagine how much pressure the people who are there right now must be under. Feeling this, this pressure for, as we know, as you mentioned, science diplomacy is sort of one of the strong. We've seen it at like the DMZ. We've seen science diplomacy in some of the most tense geopolitical conflict areas in the world, and yet right now there is this sort of uh, potential breaking point that is scary.
And
When we're
sad.
hearing, yeah, and sad. That's really
you
it too.
know
It's sad because you know that the cosmonauts aren't necessarily representative of, the party line. And I think that's the really sad part is that like when people want to do their science and they want to be cooperative, but there are other pressures that it's like, how do you even carry that?
Yeah. And I mean, I just, I can't speak for the people that are on board the station right now, but I just have this sense of just knowing that these are conversations they're having. They're not
Yeah, they
ignoring it
must
amongst
be.
themselves. They're having it. They're looking out the window and like, how in the world? Because I think, you experience Earth from that vantage point. And I honestly, I don't think you have to go to space to understand this really, but it certainly is in your face when you're looking out the window of a spaceship is like, man, we absolutely have the power. If we behave like crewmates and not passengers, we have the power to create a future for all life on Earth that's as beautiful as it looks from space. And I think that's what every person feels when they're looking out the window. They understand the contradiction of what they're looking at. It's like, man, this is this glowing, colorful, life-giving planet with this thin blue line of atmosphere, only border that matters, that thin blue line of atmosphere. And the reality of that is there for you. And then at the same time, you're like, what the heck?
Yeah. Yeah.
Knowing that beneath those clouds of that hurricane that you're seeing that looks like this billowy white, beautiful thing, that it's not so pretty underneath it. And that there are places on the planet where people are severely struggling. And I think you get it, Cara. It's like we live in a time of abundance. I mean, we really, really do. And
Oh,
what
more
you
than
said
ever in
about,
human
oh my
history. Yeah, yeah,
gosh, and
yeah.
that's abundance of resources, but it's also abundance of connectivity and understanding that we are on one planet that's a shared home. And And it's why it makes it just mind-boggling that the choices that are being made are, the ones we're having to deal with right now, with between two countries that are absolutely, it's an impact on the entire planet. Um, and it seems so strange to me that that can be the kind of choice that's made these days when we understand really, really and truly, I think everybody at one level or another understands that there's abundance and that the choices could be different for
And I mean,
life on Earth.
and I think it really emphasizes this point that's like such a struggle, because on the one hand, and obviously your book kind of focuses on this beautifully. It's a message that you have been very kind of loud and proud about, that this experience in space really is like a microcosm of Earth, and we really can learn these lessons and bring them back home. But at the same time, it's, I don't know, me personally, I feel like it's unfair for the people on the ISS right now. I feel like there's this kind of like, you're our only hope. And it's like, that
Yeah.
is too much pressure. That is not what they signed up for. It's like
Yeah.
they have this obviously real responsibility to do good science and to carry out these missions. And, you have a directive before you go there. But I don't think anybody is ever like, Nicole, so make sure that when you're on the ISS, that you also bring us world peace. If you could do that too, that would be ideal.
Yeah. And but I look at it like, wow, if it raises like a global kind of awareness of the fact that that microcosm exists, and that the work going on there has been done with a continuous human presence representing the planet, really, through that cooperation, for over 20 years now, peacefully, successfully on the same greater good mission together. And nobody's forced to do it, right?
Mhm.
Nobody's
No,
forced
they
to
want
say
to. There's like a
yes.
long
It's like
line of people who want to.
begging to be part
Yeah.
of this partnership and understanding the value in it. And and I would say longer term, the science is always going to be part of these kinds of exploratory missions and stuff, and these journeys. And yet the relationships that we have developed because of it, I think historically that's going to be, just the legacy of something like the International Space Station program, where I really do think we see for the last time, ever going forward, off our planet, and I think even on it, on these explorations, as one country. We're always going to be cooperating in some way with people from around the world to make these really challenging things happen. And gosh, I hope we don't ever stupidly, go back to thinking it's a space race in
Right.
a in a truly competitive way. I mean, there's always competition, and that actually results in some very interesting solutions to things. But that can be healthy. That can be a healthy part of the process, not a deliberately divisive part of the process.
There has always been this very American way of sort of view. I don't know. I remember talking about this on the other podcast that I work on the Skeptic's Guide. We were talking about the movie Arrival, and we were discussing sort of the science fiction quote trope of, aliens make contact and the approach is always like a military one. And I was like, I don't think it's a trope. I think that's absolutely what would happen. And that's the thing that kind of makes me sad, is that it's almost like defense first, everything else next. And if it were more like cooperation first, like the way that we have long been doing science and had science diplomacy from lab to lab to lab around the world, because this is one of the things we see all the time. We see American and Russian scientists co-publishing. We see American and Chinese scientists co-publishing um, all the time. And yet, and yes, of course, there are political influences there, and there are, it's more complicated than just it rises above, but really in many ways it does rise above.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I know there's purpose in all of that, and with respect to the defensive side of things too. But I think going in guns blaring is not the way to approach things.
Right. Right.
And I mean, I really am kind of this. looking at it from this Star Trek future of things. It's like, and there were conflicts within that, that kind of expression of sci-fi, futuristic, fantasy and stuff as well. But oh my gosh, sci-fi has brought us so much, when it transforms from sci-fi to sci-fact, and we're experiencing in our daily lives all the time. I'm always looking and saying, okay, that thing about my phone, that's Star Trek. I'm sorry, that came from Star Trek,
Right. Yeah.
or that, and even, now with the days of the plague here and COVID, walking into these buildings with where everybody's got the thermometer that's measuring your temperature. And I'm like, that tech, that is space tech. It was used to measure, distances or temperatures between planets and things in space and, all kinds of smarter stuff than I know anything about, but I know where it came from. But we don't in our daily lives pay attention. It's just there,
Yeah. And how
and
quickly we get used to it and like
yeah,
take it for
yeah,
granted.
yeah. And it's why it really upsets me when I hear commentary about, oh yeah, what are we spending all this money in space? Those billionaires spending their money in space when we need to be solving the problems here on Earth. And I'm like, oh my gosh, thank you, billionaires, for for looking at space as an answer to this. I mean, because I think publicly it's like, oh, they're just taking these little joy rides and stuff, and God bless them for getting to take the joyride, but the because all of us want to do it.
Yeah, I think I'm of two
Yeah.
minds about it because I completely agree. Like somebody has to do this and fund it the right way. And I
Yeah,
want to continue to see this. I personally, and I know I'm saying this to an astronaut,
yeah,
but I am, if all things being equal, I am a bigger fan, I should say, of like robotic missions. I think that there's only so many things, there's only so far that our meat sacks can take us, because it's not healthy for you to be in space. And I would love to hear a little bit about what your experience was like. Like, are you okay? Like, did you,
yeah,
in
yeah.
terms of the amount of time that you spent there, did you suffer any consequences?
No, I mean, and
That's
I
good.
think that's because we, as we're going and learning along the
Hmm.
way, we're employing countermeasures,
Right.
things to help us counteract as much as we humanly know about our experiences there, to counteract the these implications of being in a microgravity environment where, as soon as you get there, your body's going into like an accelerated osteoporosis kind of thing. It's wonder. I mean, our brains and our bodies are amazing in how they adapt to
Oh, I
new
can't believe you don't
environments,
like
right?
just instantly lose consciousness when
Yeah,
you're like blasting off of the surface of our planet. Like,
it's
could you,
incredible.
were you awake during all of those G forces? Do you stay awake?
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, on the space shuttle, on our like modern day spacecraft, I think
Hmm.
3 to 4 Gs is the max that you experience it
Okay.
right now. It might increase on some of the future vehicles that were like landing on Orion and stuff like that. I think there's going to be increased forces, but the for short periods of time. But the space shuttle, 3 to 4 Gs through your
That's still a
chest.
lot though, isn't
It's
it?
it's like 3 or 4 of you sitting on your chest while you're going through it,
Yeah.
but it's tolerable. It's better than 3 or 4 Gs, like pulling that in an airplane where it's coming through your head, like through, your
Right.
body that way. Um, but it's like we get to this microgravity environment and now you're floating and it's the most liberating feeling and you're flying, I mean, I dreamed about that. I actually had dreams about running and jumping and trying to fly, and being frustrated when it wouldn't happen in my dream. And there I was getting to do that. And our brains and our bodies figure that out. You very quickly start moving gracefully in 3 dimensions and know which little handrail you need to just push gently on to roll and flip and get into that next module. But at the same time, kind of on the negative side, our brains and our bodies figure it out. And they're like, hey, I don't need bones or muscles anymore to
Right.
survive in this environment. I'm not going to
Yeah.
waste any energy maintaining those things. And,
Right.
and and I mean, it's like we're programmed to respond to the environment we're in so that we can survive. And so we have to counteract that. We exercise 2 hours a day. We try to manage our food in a way that's a countermeasure. All of it, the level of CO2 in the atmosphere, all of these, the way we clean our air, all of that is about healthy wellness kind of when you're in space, so that you can come back
So you can come back. Yeah.
and
Because if
live
you're
in
just
gravity.
Yeah, if you were going to be there indefinitely, it may not matter because I mean, it probably still would matter, but you would be adjusting to that microgravity. But coming home, then you have to readjust to being
Yeah,
home,
and
right?
I mean, you mentioned it. It's like the fleshy part of us, the meat body
Mhm.
parts going off to these other places. And I agree. I mean, I think there's such again, it's a partnership, right? How we employ our robotic missions to go so much further than I mean, I think if we hadn't sent, I'm like thinking about Voyager. I'm going to do a symphonic event in New York in a couple weeks, and they're focusing on Voyager. And it's just to think about that, and like that was a pretty long time ago, that 45 years when that spacecraft ventured forth in the first time. And imagine if we hadn't done that 45 years ago and said, oh nope, we can't do that until we can send people there. It's
Right,
not, it's the
exactly. Yeah,
pathfinders for us. Where do we go, what will we learn, how will, just getting those pictures back, Cassini with those little dots of light under the rings of Saturn, and like, oh my gosh, that's us, and learning more about ourselves through those things. But you know, when we go to Mars for the first time, I don't know if we're going to be spinning that spacecraft yet with artificial gravity. I hope we are, but that's what you probably know better than me. What, 8, 9 months of travel in for the most part, a microgravity environment,
with a lot
and
of radiation, a
yeah, a lot of
lot.
radiation. So figuring out in the missions we're doing now how you manage that for the
Yeah.
human.
Mhm.
And then how do you get to Mars where there is some gravity on Mars, small, but there. And so how do you get to Mars and, roll off your spaceship and be able to walk and function and build the habitats you're going to need and, plant the gardens and all of those things that you're going to have to do to create this place that wasn't, built for you to
Exactly,
survive.
like, it may be beautiful, and there may be awe, and there may be wonder, but I we cannot forget the beauty and the awe and the wonder of being here with rainbows and waterfalls and lushness. Like, if we live on Mars, we living in lava tubes. Like, let's be honest, you know what I mean? Like, we're living, like, in modules. We're not just walking around outside.
Yeah. And,
That's just
and,
not a
and
reality.
And it's going to be the views that we have. You think about it now in the history of human spaceflight. The farthest, what are we, 250 to 300 miles up above the planet, relatively close, low Earth orbit on our space station. And the farthest those Apollo guys went for us was, 250,000 miles to the moon. All of us as human beings who've flown in space have had that work of art out our window, that colorful, glowing view of Earth out the window. And, the Apollo guys, they had the whole planet, they're like seeing this whole planet out there. You go to Mars, at some point, Earth doesn't look like Earth out the window
Oh,
anymore.
it looks like a star, the same
It's
way
like a
Mars looks like a
star.
star to us.
Yes. And
Yeah.
so, so that reality is going to be very different. And how we, I know as human beings, we will be able to manage it, but how do we psychologically take that into account as we're going to these places? And then, you think about like the O'Neillian space stations and stuff, living, millions of people living in orbit as well. You look at the renderings for those things. They're like that microcosm you mentioned again. It's like trying as much as possible to create the reality of Earth within that mechanical life support system.
Right, but it's still a mechanical life support system.
Yes.
I can't get past thinking it's just like a cruise ship, and I don't go on cruise ships. They freak me out. You know what I mean? Like,
Well,
there's
I
just
somehow have a
something.
fear of the rogue wave, but
Yeah, that's
you
fine.
know,
And I have a
but
fear of norovirus.
yeah, there's that on top of it. Yes, there's
Yeah.
that too.
It's,
But, we try to recreate it. And I think
yeah.
that's part of like the humanity of it is wanting to take that with us. It's why I took a paint kit with me to space. It's why my friend Karen, it quilted while she was in space, or people are writing poetry and doing photography. It's because the human is in the loop there, and you want to have that with you. And I think the nature that surrounds us here on Earth is absolutely something that we consider part of our humanity and want to take with us to other places as well. I can tell you the science experiment, the plant experiments on the space station are, every crew member's favorite.
Yeah, right.
you know,
Green. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I think about this experience that you just beautifully described of having our, pale blue dot, but of course for you, very, very large out the window as this sort of, I don't know, like coming from a psychology perspective, because that's where I'm at in my career. I'm training to be a clinical psychologist now. Um, I think about grounding exercises for anxiety, right? When people are experiencing acute panic, we often will utilize grounding exercises, literally putting your feet on the ground, breathing into your belly, noticing the things around you. I do something called, or a lot of therapists do something called a 5 4 3 2 1 grounding exercise, where you're like listing things that you can see, hear, feel, taste, touch, to bring you back to the ground. And of course, Earth is kind of ever present when you're on the space station. Does it serve as sort of a psychological ground for you?
Absolutely. And you just summarized chapter 6 of my book, Stay Grounded.
Love it.
And I mean, honestly, it's like that view out the window. Even though it was so weird. It's like, wow, I always like to say at whatever point that was, a point in time, it's like that's the farthest I am from the planet, that I've ever been from the planet. Because I hold hope of going to the moon one day,
Hmm.
or
Hmm.
getting back into space somehow.
Yeah.
But to be in that place, separated that way, looking back at Earth and honestly feeling more connected to it, to it, to everyone, to everything that, is part of it, than I realized I was when I was feet on it. And I think that's we talk about this, how when you can separate from things, get a new perspective on it, you reestablish your connection to it, or this understanding of your relationship with it. And I think that absolutely happens through the windows of the spaceships. And I think every crew member, they might not understand it or think about it as grounding, but in that sense. But I think the way they describe it would be that, that's what you would hear from them. And man, just in when I got back to Earth the first time, it was like, man, how do I recreate that feeling I had, that not just what I was seeing, but what I was feeling, what was getting into me, what I had opened my heart, my mind to, as I was in that place, floating, looking out the window, working with my crew there. And I had never meditated before going to space. And that became, I ended up just really coincidentally, there was this gentleman, in Tom Cronin, you should check him out, in Australia, who's was working on this project called The Portal, and wanting to get, millions of people engaged with meditation and understanding this idea of inner space and groundedness, and how much that can positively influence your life overall. And, really believing that is one of the things that we all need to do to solve our most challenging problems here on Earth too. And ended up he wanted to have a conversation, and so we did. And then he ended up like doing like 5 video meditation lessons with me that were it was so cool. And so I got introduced to it that way. And then I just kept exploring more things. And I mean, I tell the story in the book of, going online to find a yoga mat and discovering what you just described, this whole concept of earthing.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
And I mean, really, and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's it, staying grounded, earthing the planet as our ground. And that there is this kind of electrical charge to the earth itself as well. And when our feet are connected to it, there's this balance that's going on. And, but recognizing that, like becoming, like viscerally aware of it. And so every day I am standing in the grass now, or the dirt or the sand or whatever it might be. And I just consciously acknowledge that my feet are on a planet.
I can imagine that the opposite, and I can only imagine, but you can tell me that the opposite of that experience is a groundlessness. Like, did you ever find yourself having kind of an existential moment when you were on the ISS, witnessing all these sort of like sunrises and sunsets, witnessing this sense of sort of like what is up, what is down? Like, did you get a weird groundlessness ever?
Yeah, but I think it was grounding is the thing. It was so different, right? And I think a lot of times we go, and I just remember it through training and stuff. There was this idea that things are going to be more difficult, because you're floating and you got it. And they weren't more different. They were different, right? You had to learn how to move in this world of three dimensions and
Well,
float
don't you have to
versus
sleep, like,
launching.
strapped into your bed? Like, how does that work?
Well, I mean, we sleep. You could just float and sleep if you wanted, but then your hair is going to
What?
get caught in Velcro, or you might, run into
Right. Gonna
bonk your
bump into
noggin on
stuff.
something. Yeah, that wouldn't feel too good. So we just strap our sleeping bags to the wall or ceiling or whatever. And in the space station, we each had individual crew compartments about the size of an old phone booth, which ends up being perfect amount of space. And but you just float inside the sleeping bag and kind of, strap yourself in whatever way feels most comfortable. But absolutely
And
the
you
best
fall
sleep I've
asleep,
ever
you
had.
can fall asleep that way,
Oh my
like
gosh.
floating.
Yes, it was
Okay, all right.
the best sleep I've ever had in my
Ah,
entire life.
so
The best
cool!
sleep. And so, yeah, but like you say, like it it's different, and we adapt to it. And there's every crew member, probably astronaut, will tell you something about, this was uncomfortable to me, or if, going to the bathroom, I mean, whatever it is that was so different to them that they didn't necessarily like it, but still considered it part of the adventure. Um, I think it speaks a lot to who we are. And then when you bring all that experience back to Earth, it's you want to. I don't know. I just find myself wanting to have the feelings that I had when I was in space again, and the meditation, the earthing, I kind of think of it from that really, really blessed to have had that um, opportunity to be in that very unique environment, such a special vantage point perspective on our planet, and then to stand on it again and look up. I mean, there's equal awe and wonder at looking up and acknowledging your feet are on a planet, and letting that sink in, like, oh my gosh, I'm on a planet that's spinning 1,000 miles an hour.
Yeah, it's true, and we just don't even
And
have that sort of
no,
realization
it's
because 'cause we're so
just,
adapted to it.
and I think what you said earlier about us just having, it's like we forget about it. It's like we're just in this place where we're able to forget about it because it's just so perfectly designed for us. And yet I think it's we should wake up every morning with being just consciously aware of it, like acknowledging it every day. Like, oh my gosh, I live on a planet. We're all earthlings. Only border that matters, that thin blue line of atmosphere. And what am I going to do today? Be able to behave like a crewmate, not a passenger. I mean, those are the things that, I came back to Earth with, and they are with me every day. And I want everybody, stand in the dirt, look up. I mean, I'm looking out my window right now at this. There's not a cloud in the sky. It's perfect blue, and it looks like it goes on forever. And yet it's just this veil wrapped around us that's protecting us. Same way that thin metal hull of my space station did. And yet every day down here, I'm not as aware of that deadly vacuum of space as I
Right.
was on my
It's just a
spaceship. And
bigger
we should
system.
be. We should
Yeah,
be.
yeah. Absolutely. It's still a system. Still everything depends on everything else. It's just bigger, which affords us the luxury of not noticing all the time. I have to ask because, especially with this conversation about um, perspective and about kind of tapping into these experiences, one thing that translates for you between your life in space and your life at home has been your artistic endeavor. I mean, you are an artist and you brought art to your work. And then, of course, you brought your work home in your art. And I'm curious how making something in space or how making something now here on the planet that is reflective of your experience in space or under the ocean, really, um, how that keeps you connected.
Wow, it's like it's integral to my mission, I think now in so many ways. And to have that paint kit on board the space station was really a coincidental thing. I'm so thankful to my friend Mary Jane Anderson, who was also my flight crew equipment person, who was helping me pack all my stuff to go on that first space flight, and her just suggesting, hey Nicole, you're going to be living there, not just working there for months. Take something with you that you enjoy doing on Earth. And that turned into painting with watercolors in space. And then when I retired from NASA, trying to find my way. How am I going to uniquely, in some way, share the experience I had there on so many levels, right? And I just kept coming back to that opportunity to paint in space. It's like, I mean, it's one of those ways that we put the human in human spaceflight by bringing those things with us. And it's been going on since the earliest days of humans in space. Whether it's art or music or poetry, photography, whether astronauts were doing that in space or when they came back. My friend Al Warden, God bless him, not with us anymore, but Apollo 15 guy, who the way he like just summarized and like cathartically for himself as well, uh, his whole spaceflight experience was through a book of poetry called Hello Earth, and you would never have known it. And I just think it speaks so beautifully to how even those Apollo guys that you would think of as just the right stuff kind of thing, they all had some other kind of creative human side to them that they wanted to bring to space with them as well. And yeah, and now, back here on Earth, art has become both like my personal way of trying to share the experience, but also using it through the work we're doing with the Space for Art Foundation, and just like we like to say, uniting a planetary community of children through the awe and wonder of space exploration and the healing power of art. And, I guess in short, space themed art therapy stuff. But just, yeah. And I mean, I don't think, I know that it was probably the second art session we did with these kids in pediatric cancer centers where I'm like, man, this is my next mission in life. I got to go to space so I could do these projects with these kids around the world. Kids that are going through the worst thing you hope they ever have to deal with in their lives. And they come into these sessions, and space as the inspiration is allowing them to kind of transcend that experience they're having there. And they're sitting up straighter and stronger, and they're talking to me about their future because of space exploration. And then they're creating something beautiful that's going to be put into a community art project with other kids, and they'll see that as part of something bigger. And yeah, so much about it that just resonated so wonderfully with me. And I never would have thought, I mean, if you'd asked me before I flew in space, okay, Nicole, is art going to be the way that you I would have said no. I would have said I'm going to do art, but as I always have. But I wouldn't have thought that it would be just the kind of the focus of what I'd be using to share the experience and move on to that next mission.
Yeah, and I mean, it does that so beautifully, like you said, through the foundation, seeing something that, it has face validity. It's obvious that when a child engages with art, and especially art like otherworldly art, right? That it ignites something in them. But we also there's also a science here. And I mean, apropos of our conversation last night when I was looking online, I literally stumbled on an article that was published in Nature like 3 days ago called Beauty and Wonder of Science Boosts Researchers' Well-Being. And it's literally an experimental, or actually this is more survey driven, but an investigation into how biologists and physicists associate things like aesthetics with their work. And they found, these researchers, that those people were more resilient during COVID, that they had higher levels of well being, those who appreciated the awe and the wonder and the beauty in their work. How cool is that?
Yeah, and so if they're doing that, then they're appreciating it in the world around them, just in general, right? Yeah, you'll have to send me the link because I'd love to share that too, and learn more from it. I don't know. I love the psychology of it too, since that's your thing as well. I mean, I'd love to hear as well, because I just think there's so much to this, and these kids, that we work with, it's like there's this beyond their years wisdom that comes out of them. It's just incredible, and I mean, I think the moment where I discovered this was my next mission was talking to this one young girl. I mean, she was like 7 years old. She's in there for cancer treatment. She's got this cute little hat on because she's got no hair, and she's working on space art with me. And she might have been painting her dog. I don't know. We never tell them you have to paint something spacey. and
Dog with a
but
helmet. Why not?
whatever, and
Yeah.
or just putting blobs on the paper on the canvas. I
Right.
don't know, but she just started talking to me, and I think it's so relevant in what we were talking about earlier in terms of humans going farther off the planet as well, and especially to where Earth won't look like Earth anymore. It's like she's, Miss Nicole, what you do as an astronaut and flying in space, that must be a lot like what I go through in the hospital here. And I'm like, you got to keep the smile on your face, right? And I'm thinking, I'm just kind of shocked by this statement she just kind of matter of factly made. And then she just keeps painting and talking, and she goes on. She's like, yeah, you don't, if you're flying in space, you don't get to see your family and friends the same way. You can't just go outside anytime you want. They're doing all kinds of tests on you. Your body's changing. You have to eat different kinds of food. I think you've got the radiation too. And I was floored by this. I mean, I've got not just goosebumps on my arms, but like down my legs every time I think about it, because that was, I mean, talk about beyond your years wisdom and just the philosophy in that, the psychology of it, all of it, the awareness and that conversation she was having with me. I'm like, man, yeah. It made me know especially with the work we're doing with the foundation, we will never stop doing. If we don't do anything else, we will always be doing these projects with these kids. And yet there's so much more to it. We think about astronauts on those journeys in a relatively small spacecraft. It's not going to be that Martian movie one right off the bat, right? And how will we deliver these kinds of things for them? Yeah, I mean, I'm hopeful it'll be like the Star Trek holodeck, but how do we provide an outlet for that creativity, for that kind of human need, for that awe, that wonder, in the work to come to them in those places. And it's the same kind of thing as what we were doing with these kids in the hospitals and stuff. And we just got to make sure that we are purposefully, thoughtfully incorporating that into the missions, not just thinking about the spacecraft design, but thinking about how the humans, the meaty ones, as you say, will will be participating in this and will stay healthy and well as part of
Absolutely. Well, gosh, I've already kept you longer than I said I would, Nicole, but
it.
you know what? I always close every episode by asking my two guests the same questions. They're big picture, pretty profound questions, although you don't have to answer that way. And of course, I think that goes along well with the work that you've done. So I'm curious how you will answer these questions, especially given your perspective and your experiences. So, are you ready for them?
I'm ready.
All
We'll
right.
see, won't we?
Yeah. We'll just edit out the really long
Yeah.
pause where we have to think about it. So, when you think about the future, in whatever context is relevant to you, it could be informed by your work, it could be personal, familial, uh, communal, it could be global, or I often jokingly say cosmic, but in your case, that may apply. Number one, what is the thing that keeps you up the most at night? The thing you're most concerned about? Maybe there's a borderline kind of pessimism or a cynicism there. You really are quite concerned. But then on the flip side of that, to leave on a more positive note, where are you finding your hope, your optimism, your excitement?
Wow. Well, I think the answer to both of those kind of falls on the same thing, and we've talked about it a little bit already. Is I really, really worry that that people struggle to find their way to acknowledge their role as a crewmate, right? And so that scares me. Gosh, how do we open people's hearts and minds to the awe and wonder that's around us every day? Even in the harshest conditions, I think we need to have our hearts and minds open to that. So I worry about how do I help help people, become more aware of that. I'm hopeful that the book will help do that, but I think there's just more to it, than that. And I want people to acknowledge that awareness to bring it into their lives. And then I'm hopeful because there is awe and wonder around us everywhere, and we can find a way to open ourselves up to that. And when we do, just good things come from it. I personally believe, a material example of it is the work that we've done together as an international community on the International Space Station. And that if we pay more attention to how we've done that in that little microcosm, I love that, and how it is, yes, orders of magnitude when we look at on a planetary scale, but we've done more complex things, I think. It's totally doable. And we have wonderful examples out there of people really, really working hard to make that happen.
Here, here. Everybody, the book is Back to Earth: What Life in Space Taught Me About Our Home Planet and Our Mission to Protect It, by Nicole Stott. Nicole, thank you so much for being here. It was
Thank you, Cara.
such
My
a thrill.
pleasure.
Oh, and everybody listening, thank you for coming back week after week. I'm really looking forward to the next time we all get together to talk nerdy.